Speaking of elections, as campaign season in Israel restarts for the third time in under a year, Israeli President Rivlin is urging the public not to lose faith in democracy. And he says that we have both a chance to fight for the right to disagree as well as a duty to find common ground.
Well, to that end, it seems that the Blue and White Party will be the first to change tactics, reportedly easing demands for secular policy in hopes of courting the ultra-Orthodox parties. And here now with more is columnist for Newsweek and editor of HistoryCentral.com, Marc Schulman. So, Marc, our first question is, Yair Lapid has given up on the prime minister rotation. Are we now likely to see a coalition between Kahol-Lavan and the ultra-Orthodox parties?
More likely. Not likely, but more likely. The moment he gave up on the rotation, commentators in the ultra-Orthodox community said, a major obstacle has been removed. Now, theoretically, we could come to some sort of agreement with blue and white. Now, it's theoretical. The ultra-Orthodox have been in an agreement with the Likud since 1984, and they've never varied from that agreement. Shas has, but the ultra-Orthodox Haredim parties have not. So we'll have to see whether it'll make any difference or not. It certainly increases the ability to maneuver.
Well, it's interesting, though, because Kahol-Lavan basically built up its support over this, connection and this commitment to the secular community here in Israel. But now we're seeing that might change. And so will they, in fact, lose support as a result of that kind of switch in I guess, identity?
Well, they might lose some support to the Labor Party if they don't merge with it, or Meretz, or the Democratic Front, as it's called. That's really possible. But look, blue and white is all about removing Netanyahu from office. So that is really the major goal that they have, and I think everyone identifies with them for the goal of removing Netanyahu. I think
the voters.
The voters, their voters, their supporters.
Yeah, right.
And now, because there's always a chance that Gideon Sa'ar could win the Likud primary, and that changes everything, then I'm not sure what sort of campaign we'll have at that point. So.
All right. Now, another thing, for example, is we're seeing with the Shabbat buses that are now operating in Tel Aviv and in the central area municipalities. In Bnei Brak, 16 were actually just arrested during protests against the bus system. Are we going to see maybe if the ultra-Orthodox pair with blue and white, are we going to see any sort of change up in their voter base or anything?
Look, I think what we're going to see happen most likely is everyone's going to say, well, keep the status quo exactly the way it is, which means the Shabbat buses run by the municipalities will stay, and no one's going to attempt to get national Shabbat buses taking place.
So a national venture would never occur.
Well, not at this point. I mean, that's never. But that would be the compromise I think everyone would have to live with in the end. The ultra-Orthodox are going to complain and scream, and there'll be demonstrations, but eventually they're going to go along with it, because I believe the latest poll shows that 87% of Israelis favor these buses. And so it's really hard to go against the whole majority of the country. Ultra-Orthodox have done a very good job of balancing getting what they want, but being careful they don't push too far. When they push too far, they realize they have to back off a little bit. And so the buses are something that doesn't impact them in the same way the draft does. So the draft, they can never agree to the draft, because drafting their children means losing them as far as they're concerned, because their whole key is to keep them within their ghetto. So they can't give up on that. But the buses that the seculars take, that's okay, sort of. I mean, they'll protest. I think it's terrible, but ultimately it doesn't impact their community directly, and that's what they care about.
Well, I still think that what we're seeing here is ultimately a battle over the religious identity of this state, and that is largely going to influence the outcome of the next election. So we'll see what takes place. But Marc, thank you so much for joining us.